They said it would never happen, that the United States government and Chinese trade officials would actually sit down in one room and find common ground on the much-debated issue of rare earth metals. But guess what? Behind closed doors, they have reportedly hammered out a rare earth export agreement that could shake the entire global economy. Yes, the very foundation of cutting-edge technology, smartphones, drones, electric vehicle motors, and advanced weaponry depends on these precious resources. And now, after decades of clashing rhetoric and skyrocketing tensions, Washington and Beijing have decided, at least for the moment, to lower their weapons and sign a framework of understanding. The question is, how did we get here, and what does it mean for you? In today's deep dive, we will unravel the heart of this deal, lay out the hidden motivations on both sides, and examine the bigger picture behind what might be one of the most pivotal moments in modern trade history. And believe me, we have some surprising twists to share. So, stay tuned, because this story is not just about metals. It's about power, control, and the future of global innovation. First, let us cut straight to the core of this issue. Rare earth metals are essential components in nearly every modern technological marvel, from electric car batteries to the microchips powering your favorite smartphones. Without them, our high-tech ecosystem would pretty much collapse, or at least stumble significantly. For decades, China has maintained a dominant position in mining and processing these elements, effectively making it the gatekeeper for much of the global supply. The United States, worried about the security of its own production lines, has been pressuring Beijing to keep these exports flowing freely, even as tensions escalated under the Trump administration. So, when news broke that Washington had actually engaged in a second round of high-stakes trade talks in London, with the aim of formulating a framework for easing restrictions on rare earth exports, analysts around the world raised eyebrows. How did we leap from heated standoffs to cautious collaboration? And crucially, will any of this truly lead to a lasting resolution? To understand the gravity of this moment, we need to revisit the not-so-distant past. Picture the scene a couple of years ago. Each side was slapping tariffs on the other, raising the stakes so dramatically that experts feared a full-blown trade war. Chinese communication giants found themselves blacklisted by American regulators, while U.S. tech industries scrambled to diversify their supply chains. The hostility even spilled over into realms beyond simple economics, with talk about restricting visas for students, limiting international collaborations, and intensifying scrutiny on technology transfers. At the core of all this was a deep mistrust. Washington feared Beijing's dominance could translate into political or strategic leverage, and Beijing, in turn, felt unfairly targeted by what it perceived as attempts to stifle its rise as a global power. It was in this environment, thick with suspicion, that the negotiations we are discussing took root. So, do not be fooled by the formal handshake photos. The journey here was anything but smooth. In the first round of negotiations in Geneva just last month, tariffs became the immediate flashpoint. The United States wanted a tangible commitment from China to open up its market, particularly in the technology sector. Meanwhile, Beijing insisted that American tariffs on Chinese goods had to be slashed considerably before it would even consider relaxing export restrictions. Talks were halted repeatedly, and reports leaked that both sides were on the brink of walking away. But then came the breakthrough phone call between the two countries' leaders, which seemed to breathe fresh life into the negotiations. The promise was simple yet ambitious: significantly reduce tariffs within 90 days, and, more importantly, tackle the thorny issue of rare earth exports in a structured, systematic manner. Neither side blinked, or at least not publicly, but insiders say that everyone in the room understood the enormous stakes. Fast forward to London, where a second round of high-level talks took place. The atmosphere was tense but oddly optimistic. After all, major progress had been made in Geneva, and both sides were eager not to squander that momentum. It's here that U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick revealed the framework for implementing the Geneva Agreement, emphasizing how critical it was for ensuring a stable flow of these prized metals. According to sources close to the negotiations, the Chinese delegates, led by Vice Minister of Commerce Li Chenggang, approached the talks with a surprising degree of openness and candor. One insider even described their private discussions as more akin to a brainstorming session than a standoff, though no one is naive enough to think that underlying tensions have magically disappeared. Still, there was a palpable sense that something had shifted, and that perhaps, just perhaps, a genuine roadmap was being drawn up. So, What exactly does this rare earth export framework entail? While the final text remains confidential, leaks suggest that it outlines a set of principles rather than binding regulations. In other words, it is built around trust and mutual assurances, rather than heavy-handed enforcement measures. The United States may gradually ease certain export controls on advanced semiconductors, an issue that has long frustrated Beijing, if China facilitates a more predictable flow of rare earth metals. Symbolically, this is huge, because it ties together two of the most critical resources for modern technological development. Practically, however, it's a balancing act. Critics argue that an agreement based on goodwill can unravel at the first sign of trouble, especially if either side feels the other is violating the spirit of the accord. One false move, and we could be right back where we started, pointing fingers and threatening new sanctions. But let's not gloss over the potential upsides, which are significant. For one, American tech companies have been grappling with supply chain uncertainties for years now, terrified that any disruption in the rare earth pipeline could cripple entire product lines. This new framework, albeit fragile, might give them the confidence to ramp up production and invest in long-term research. On the Chinese side, loosening restrictions could open the door to more collaborative ventures, especially in advanced chip manufacturing, that might benefit their own industries and help maintain economic growth. And for consumers worldwide, this could mean more stability in gadget prices, as well as faster innovation cycles. The whole situation is a high-stakes bet on cooperation, with significant rewards if it pays off. The keyword here, of course, is if. Yet, the Trump administration, known for its strong stance on Beijing, is hardly letting its guard down. Officials continue to voice concerns about overproduction and dumping practices, fears that have been around for much longer than the current president's term. In the White House's view, China has a history of flooding markets with cheaply produced goods, thereby undercutting competitors in other countries. Rare earth elements, while more specialized, are not magically exempt from that possibility. Meanwhile, Beijing counters that many of these accusations are overblown or politically motivated. They believe the United States is using tariffs and other measures as a way to maintain technological dominance and curtail China's rising global influence. So while the framework might serve as a temporary truce, it is far from a permanent resolution, because the ideological clash remains firmly intact. This leads us to a broader question. Is this whole situation merely a piece in a larger geopolitical chess game? Some experts think so. They argue that by focusing on rare earth exports, we are really looking at the tip of an iceberg involving everything from 5G infrastructure to artificial intelligence arms races. It's almost as if each side is trying to position itself as the indispensable power broker in tomorrow's tech-driven world. From that vantage point, the London talks might have been more about setting the stage for bigger battles to come. And let's be real, no single framework can undo years of rivalry overnight, but it can buy time, allowing both parties to pause and consider more strategic, long-term moves. The question is whether either side will use this breathing space to forge genuine cooperation or to regroup for the next confrontation. At this point, you might be wondering, how does any of this affect everyday people who are neither miners nor chip engineers? The truth is that rare earth elements lie at the heart of countless consumer goods and services. From the shiny gadget in your pocket to the electric vehicle charging outside your office, the availability and cost of these materials can determine whether that next technological leap is feasible. If relations sour again and export restrictions reappear, we might see major disruptions in consumer products. Prices could spike, innovation might slow down, and entire market sectors could be thrown into chaos. Conversely, if this framework helps maintain a more consistent supply of rare earths, that stability could lead to cheaper, better devices for everyone. So, yes, even if you're not a policy wonk, you have a stake in what goes on behind these closed-door discussions. Now, let's take a quick moment to reflect on something crucial. Even though we talk about the United States and China as monolithic entities, each country is teeming with various stakeholders: politicians, lobbyists, business magnates, regulatory agencies, and so on. Their interests do not always align, even within their own borders. Inside the United States, for example, large technology firms might be applauding the framework, while anti-China hawks in Congress might see it as capitulation. In China, the central government might welcome the economic benefits, but nationalist groups could criticize any perceived concessions. This complexity means that the path from signed framework to actual implementation is fraught with potential pitfalls. One small faction's opposition, if strong enough, can derail the entire agreement. So keep an eye on the internal politics of both nations. Sometimes the biggest threats to international accords are domestic, not foreign. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the high-stakes world of rare earth metals and international diplomacy, and want to explore more hidden twists and turns in global politics, consider tapping that like button. Trust us, it really helps. Because, let's face it, this is the kind of story that might seem dry on the surface, but it is absolutely riveting when you realize how it impacts your day-to-day life. After all, what happens if the phone you plan to buy next year suddenly soars in price due to supply chain shocks? Or if your favorite electric car brand hits a production snag because rare earth magnets are in short supply? These questions are no longer hypothetical. They are real concerns hinging on deals made by people whose names you might not even recognize. So, if you have found value in this narrative so far, do not hesitate to show your support. But let's continue. One of the more overlooked aspects of this story is the global scramble it may trigger in other regions. Nations in Europe and Asia have also been watching these developments intently. As the geopolitical tug-of-war plays out, some countries may decide to ramp up their own mining and processing capacity for rare earth elements, aiming to become less reliant on unpredictable trade deals. There might also be a surge in advanced research to find synthetic alternatives or more efficient recycling processes that reduce dependence on newly mined materials. Companies could accelerate plans to localize supply chains, forging new partnerships in places like Africa, Australia, or South America, all of which have varying degrees of untapped rare earth potential. This is not just an American or a Chinese issue. It is a global reshuffling of resource allocation, and the ripple effects could shape the future of technology development worldwide. Historical perspective also offers a reminder that such moments of compromise can be fleeting. In the early 2000s, believers in global free trade were riding high on assurances that trade, once liberalized, would remain so forever. Yet, the events of the last few years, from Brexit to the pandemic to the rise of protectionist sentiment, have proven that economics can shift rapidly under political pressure. The current arrangement between Washington and Beijing might well usher in a new phase of openness, or it might serve merely as a patch, buying time until the next storm. Observers caution that both sides face domestic pressures that could undermine the best intentions. In the United States, that might mean renewed calls for punitive tariffs if the next election cycle stirs up populist resentment. In China, it could manifest as a reversion to strict export quotas if Beijing feels its strategic interests are threatened by outside forces. Furthermore, do not forget the possibility that other disputes on issues like intellectual property theft, technology transfer, or human rights could easily seep into the trade sphere. If either side decides to leverage rare earth exports as a bargaining chip in a completely different conflict, this framework could be in jeopardy. In international relations, nothing exists in a vacuum, and today's ally can become tomorrow's adversary if circumstances shift. Indeed, history is full of examples of so-called permanent agreements that unraveled the moment broader tensions flared up. The biggest question is whether Washington and Beijing will act in a spirit of genuine partnership, recognizing that both stand to gain from stable supply chains, or whether they will revert to the zero-sum mindset that has fueled so many disputes in the past. Only time will tell. Imagine a future scenario where American automobile brands announce that new electric vehicles will feature advanced motors reliant on Chinese-sourced rare earth metals, while simultaneously, Chinese smartphone manufacturers boast cutting-edge chips thanks to a partial easing of U.S. export controls. Such a reality could redefine not just trade, but also consumer choices around the world. As collaborative efforts spur lightning-fast technological progress, it might even lead to unexpected partnerships, with research labs in Silicon Valley teaming up with counterparts in Shenzhen, pooling resources to drive breakthroughs in everything from quantum computing to next-generation battery technology. Yet looming over all these possibilities is the specter of a sudden breakdown, a rupture that could force businesses to scramble for alternative suppliers, pushing up costs and stalling innovation that would have otherwise flourished. It is a precarious balance indeed. Not surprisingly, the business sector is already reacting with a mix of anticipation and caution. Company executives, from electronics giants to aerospace manufacturers, are dissecting every word from official press releases, looking for clues on how to position themselves in this new environment. Investors are circling the rare earth market, anticipating possible spikes or drops in price based on how smoothly the framework is implemented. This is a game of confidence, and confidence can be a fragile thing. One alarming headline One misinterpreted policy statement, and the entire house of cards could wobble. That said, the general consensus in financial circles is that any forward movement, however modest, is better than a continuation of the increasingly volatile cycle of tit-for-tat retaliations. Still, seasoned analysts warn that the devil is in the details. Neither side has made binding promises, so the market may also see rapid pivots if talks stall in upcoming rounds of negotiation. And there you have it, a cautious deal that might herald a new era of mutual benefit, or might be little more than a truce in an ongoing struggle for global tech supremacy. Clearly, the stakes are astronomical, not just for the two countries involved, but for everyone whose life is touched by the wonders of modern technology. From giant corporations to the small startup tinkering with game-changing ideas in a suburban garage, all eyes are fixed on where this agreement leads. If the story so far has piqued your curiosity, do consider subscribing for more in-depth analyses and future updates. After all, staying informed is the best way to navigate the rapidly changing landscape that could define our digital destinies. The next months will be critical. Will Washington and Beijing move closer toward lasting harmony, or will fresh disagreements flare up, pulling the negotiation rug from under their feet once more? The truth is that no one knows for sure, but we will be watching every twist and turn, ready to break down what it all means for you. Make no mistake, this saga is far from finished. In fact, it has only just begun its next chapter. Both Washington and Beijing must now walk a tightrope of diplomatic maneuvering and domestic politicking, balancing the need for economic growth against the tug of nationalist sentiment. One misstep, and this fragile framework could come crashing down, leaving the rest of the world scrambling for solutions. But if both sides find the wisdom to keep lines of communication open and the courage to seek common ground in the face of adversity, then perhaps we will remember this moment not as a fleeting gesture, but as a turning point in the grand story of global trade and cooperation. Only time will tell which path they choose.